The New Orleans Saints' initial 53-man roster is set, but there will be change on the way, and offensive line is one of the places where those changes could start. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints. As the Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst over at WWL TV. On today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're still breaking down the 53-man roster. Yeah, we're going to be here for a minute, all right? The initial 53-man roster, lots of stuff is going to change. Lots of stuff's going to be different. Let's break it all down. What could be on the way for the New Orleans Saints, including positions where they might still be looking to address. We're also going to take a look at the safety battle and other camp battles. How are they impacted by this New Orleans Saints 53-man roster? Because the safety battle still feels very unclear. And then we're going to kick everything off today with our kickoff. The offensive line for the New Orleans Saints still needs help. SOS, please, someone help me. That's what we're going to dive into next on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen of the day every day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right. The New Orleans Saints offensive line for the initial 53-man roster is set. But is it like set though? It doesn't feel like it, right? It still feels like this is a position where the Saints will be in the market and looking for more help. They're going to be looking for that help when it comes to depth. They may be looking at that help or looking for that help when it comes to finding a starter, but it's just unlikely you're going to find a new starter in at least the roster cuts. I guess now you could start calling teams to figure out about trades and things like that. Now is the time to do that. In addition to, it was also the time to do that before roster cuts. But at that time before roster cuts, you're really calling teams and going, hey, is there anybody that you're looking to get something for instead of sending them to waivers is really the big thing. Now you can kind of start reaching out and being like, all right, so how do you feel like your offensive line fits? Is there anybody that might be, that there's a price for, anything like that, and start to see if there's anybody out there that matches a price that you might be willing to take. But, look, we know how it goes, right? La'el Collins is on the, free agency market. He's on the free agency market now. Could the New Orleans Saints call him up? Yeah, maybe. But I think overall this team is going to roll with Trevor Penning as its starting right tackle and then start to look at whether or not it needs to pivot after that. So in order to be ready for that, you could potentially look at your opportunity to build up depth. And I think that's exactly what the New Orleans Saints should be looking to do. Now, that could be on their 53-man roster, but it could also be on their practice squad. Dennis Allen talking about how the team would typically carry somewhere between 10 to 12 players combined when it comes to their active roster and their practice squad. Well, right now they have 8 players on their active roster. Your starters, Taliesin Fuanga at left tackle, Lucas Patrick at left guard, center Eric McCoy, right guard Cesar Ruiz, and then Trevor Penning at right tackle with backups Nick Saldiveri, Landon Young, and Ali Udoh, who all give you great versatility once Nick Saldiveri is healthy again. But is that going to be enough? That's the part that we don't know yet. So for Nick Saldiveri, who Dennis Allen said that they're hoping to get back soon, one of the reasons why they carried him on the roster coming over into the 53 as opposed to putting one injured reserve like they did with Kendre Miller at roster cuts. It's just a little bit of a different game. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? It's a little bit of a different game in that situation. So Saints could still be looking and should still be looking. And as I understand it, are interested in continuing to seek out what they might be able to find when it comes to the offensive line. But I do think that it's more about depth as opposed to going out there and trying to find a new starter in place of Trevor Penning. Because it's just unlikely you're going to find that person on waivers or on the market right now that's been cut from a team. Like, teams didn't cut their starting caliber talent. They cut depth guys and everything like that. And so there's the opportunity to be able to benefit from that along the offensive line. But that's it. The other thing you have to really think about here too, if you're the New Orleans Saints, is who fits, right? La'el Collins played for Cincinnati, played for Dallas. these are drop back systems. These aren't wide zone systems. These aren't heavy play action systems. Although Dallas maybe incorporated a little bit more, but not over time, or not at that time. And so, can you find somebody that's actually the right fit too, is the other question. And I think that has to be the priority, right? You don't want to just go out there and grab an offensive lineman whose name you recognize. You want to go out there and grab an offensive lineman who has played in a system with a lot of zone run, played in a system that has a lot of outside zone, that runs a lot of play action, bootlegs, moving off the ball, being athletic, being multiple and versatile in terms of your ability to play multiple positions in the offensive line because you're a depth guy, which means you need to be able to play multiple spots, all that. Where do you find that player, right? That caliber player. And again, it doesn't have to be starting caliber. It just has to be depth caliber in terms of their ability to be able to get out there and maybe help in a pinch and stuff like that, or be somebody on the practice squad that could be a standard game day elevation, for instance, things like that. Like that's really what you're looking for in the midst of all this. And especially when it comes to protecting your quarterback, like all this goes back to Derek Carr. All this goes back to the New Orleans Saints quarterback position. Dennis Allen didn't name a QB2 in his press conference following roster cuts. I explained why that might be the case. I'm all about standing 10 toes down and saying, boom, that's the person. I get that though. I like that. That's what I would do. But again, I'm not a head coach. I'm not paid to do that, right? So maybe I would be doing it differently. And maybe that's the reason why I never became a head coach, is because I make bad choices. But I think that's what I would have done, but that's not what Dennis Allen did. And there's no reason for him to do it, if we're being honest, this week. And so going into next week, then all of a sudden things get a little bit more clear. But look, you don't want to ever turn to your backup quarterback. You don't want that. That's not what the backup quarterback, I mean, it is what the backup quarterback is there for, but you don't appoint your backup quarterback in the hopes that he ever sees the field. No, you appoint your backup quarterback in the hopes that they never see the field, and that you can continue to develop that backup quarterback, and you can continue to develop the quarterback talent that's in your quarterback room. But in order for you to do that, you got to be able to protect them. And so this offensive line is going to continue to be under a microscope, right? It's been under a microscope all training camp. It's been under a microscope all preseason. It's going to continue to be under the microscope, especially early on in the season, going up against teams like Dallas, Philly, whoever it is they play week 4. I'm just kidding. It's the Atlanta Falcons, but we're skipping them. The Kansas City Chiefs, right? Like, I mean, if you need to know where you're at, you're going to figure it out over the course of the first 5 games, first handful of games. Like, there's no doubt about that. So we'll see where the New Orleans Saints go when it comes to all this. But I definitely think that addressing their offensive line group further, whether that means adding talent to the practice squad to kind of help, or potentially adding talent to the roster itself to help, in either case, has major benefit and is a major need for this New Orleans Saints team. All right, coming up next, I want to take a look at the safety battle, which still feels very unclear, and what the roster says about the other safety battles that were ongoing. We appreciate you very much for being here, and we will have that for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Game Time is my favorite place to go to buy tickets for events, whether I'm buying them in advance or if I'm buying them, let's be real, like I typically do, last minute, right? It's a great destination for last minute tickets. It's also a great destination for just a transparent, user-friendly ticket purchasing experience. You go to Game Time, you toggle on the all-in pricing option, and then boom, once you get to checkout, no fees popped up out of nowhere. Everything that you expected to pay is what you end up seeing at the checkout screen with all-in pricing on, and you can see views from your seats. Make sure you know where you're going to be before you get there. Make sure you got a good view of the stage or of the field, whatever it is that you are checking out. So go and check them out today. Take all the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, family. I'm still not entirely sure who it is that's going to start at safety next to Tyrann Mathieu, but the New Orleans Saints made one thing clear. one player is not. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here, for making us your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Michelle Majuk, Vinny Iyer, giving you everything that you need to know around fantasy football every single Monday through Friday. Great fantasy football advice, making you the smartest fantasy football player in your league. Go and check them out today. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well. Boy, was I wrong when it came to safety, huh? And actually a lot of us were. We were all convinced it was going to be Johnathan Abram. Johnathan Abram was going to be the guy next to Tyrann Mathieu. They looked great next to one another at the end of the season last year. Those 2 games against Tampa and Atlanta. But overall, it seems that things did not go as swimmingly as we thought that they would go around the Johnathan Abram situation. So what does this mean? Well, Johnathan Abram could be back, right? He's a veteran, so he's not subject to waivers. He's got more than 3 years of accredited seasons. And so because of that, he just gets released. That means he can wait around, right? New Orleans Saints give him a little bit of a handshake. Hey, buddy, don't go anywhere, right? We're going to make some moves on the roster, and then we're going to get you back, right? So there is the opportunity for that. There's also the opportunity to bring him back in the practice squad. But with him being a vested veteran that was released, he also has the opportunity to do any dang thing he wants. So he can go and sign with another team. He can go and do all that as well. So we'll see what happens, bottom line, when it comes to Johnathan Abram. But I'll tell you, it doesn't sound like he's going to be back. We'll see. So for the New Orleans Saints, they now have to be ready for week 1. Who's going to start next to Tyrann Mathieu? Now, I can make the case for either Will Harris or Jordan Howden, their second-year safety, who they love and who they believe in, and that they believe is going to be a very good player in the NFL. The trick is they think he's going to be a very good player in the NFL as a post safety or a deep safety, not necessarily a box safety. They worked with him over the course of the offseason to try to kind of get him acclimated with that potential role. And it worked on some plays. It didn't work on others, such as the rushing touchdown where Jordan Howden missed the tackle on the 49ers quarterback who ran into the end zone. I won't say his name as to not bring up horrible memories for you of a game last season. It's Joshua Dobbs. Sorry, I got to say the name at least, right? Why go Jordan Howden? Okay, so if you erase that play, his play in the box was pretty acceptable, pretty adequate, like what you would need, right? As a guy that's developing and learning how to play that position, right? Jordan Howden didn't come in as a ready-made box safety. He came in as a ready-made coverage safety, so you're teaching him something different. He's a big dude. And so because of that, he can be a sound tackler, but I know all you're going to do is throw the Joshua Dobbs play back in my face, but accept that as one play, please. But he's a solid tackler. He really is. And they like him. They believe in him. He's coachable, all this other stuff. So easy, right? He's a very talented player. You want talented players out on the field. Does him being out there give you a part of your best 11? Maybe. And so that's a decision that the Saints would have to make there. Will Harris, on the other hand, also a good option. And remember, he's coming from the Detroit Lions, whose defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, was the DB's coach here in New Orleans. A lot of what's going on over in Detroit matches the culture and scheme of what's going on here in New Orleans. So he's already a solid fit. So if you ask me, I think the arrow might be pointing a little bit more towards Will Harris. But I also don't think that you're just going to see one safety playing that role. I think there will be times where it is Jordan Howden, or it is Will Harris, or maybe you see another safety get involved there. JT Gray perhaps gets involved there at some point. Any number of things, right? Any number of those things can happen. And so, but if I'm asked, like, which one's going to see the most snaps next to Tyrann Mathieu, then yeah, I'm probably going to go with Will Harris because he's the veteran. He already has experience in a very similar system, all that. And then you have the valuable depth for right now of a Jordan Howden that could play in place of Tyrann Mathieu or play in place of Will Harris. Heck, he had to do it for most of the games last year because Marcus May wasn't out there. So, makes sense. Now, the Saints could still go to the market at this position. We'll take a look at that here in a little bit. There's one name in particular that absolutely stands out in terms of player that was moved on from, surprisingly, this offseason. What about the other position battles? Well, we know that Matthew Hayball won the punter battle over Lou Hedley. And I said it that way on purpose because I think a lot of people saw the last punt that Lou Hedley had against the Tennessee Titans and said, well, Lou Hedley lost the job. No. Matthew Hayball won the job. Honestly, the push that he made towards the last couple weeks of training camp, plus the preseason games, all those other things, over a 50-yard average in terms of punting. His net yards were better. His hang time was slightly better. All of that just pointed back to Matthew Hayball being the guy that deserved to win that spot. It's the decision that I would have made. It's not the decision that I thought the New Orleans Saints were going to make. So kudos, because I didn't think they were going to want to do that because that's their fourth punter in 5 years. Not ideal. You've had a little bit of a turnstile when it comes to the position. So hopefully Matt Hayball can bring a little bit of stability to the position, the lefty Aussie punter. We'll see where things go there. Wide receiver was another big one who was going to steal the last spot or spots when it came to the wide receivers behind Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Cedric Wilson, and A.T. Perry. And the answer turned out to be not Jordan Mims. He's a running back. The answer turned out to be Bub Means and Mason Tipton. Mason Tipton, one of 4 undrafted free agents to make this roster. It left guys like Stanley Morgan Jr., Equinemius St. Brown, Kevin Austin, Samson Nakua, all on the outs when it came to that wide receiver spot. I think the majority of those guys will be practice squad options for the team. The interesting thing will be, does Mason Tipton hang on? Or do the Saints find an offensive lineman on waivers that they want to sign? Because in order for them to do that, they got to sign him to the active roster. And then because of that, have to make a corresponding move and then try to sneak Mason Tipton through waivers at a later time, as opposed to while everybody's looking at the waiver wire. Now, trust me, everyone's looking at the waiver wire all the time, but just something to consider, right? Because Mason Tipton was a little bit of a surprise, a pleasant surprise. We like Mason Tipton. We are pro Mason Tipton, but a little bit of a surprise. Wasn't able to appear in any of the preseason games, missed a bunch of training camp, and New Orleans Saints said, you know what? Doesn't matter. He was one of the better wide receivers that hit the field the entire time that he was healthy. Bet we can bring him back to that. And that's what I think that their focus is going to be on. And Kevin Williams, New Orleans Saints wide receivers coach, perfect coach to do something like that. So we'll see. Hopefully Mason Tipton gets to hold on to his spot. But you know how it goes. The initial roster is just the first roster. It's not the final roster. So we'll see where things go and how things change over the course of the next couple of days. And then I spoiled the last one that I was going to talk about, but running back. And we can move through this one quickly because we kind of already know how this one was going to go anyway. Jordan Mims made the roster. Jacob Kibodi did not. I expected Jacob Kibodi, if he makes it through the waivers, which seems pretty likely, because again, if you pick somebody up from waivers, you got to be adding them to your active roster. With that being the case, the Saints put Kendre Miller on injured reserve. So real opportunity to where if Jacob Kibodi does make it back to the New Orleans Saints practice squad, that they can elevate him as a standard game day elevation at some point over the course of those first 4 games, because Kendre Miller is not going to be available. And Jordan Mims is going to get a really, really, really good look because of it. So it should be a lot of opportunity for young Jordan Mims. And then, of course, at kicker, Blake Grupe wins it out, just as we expect. Let's discuss a little bit on the other side here. We'll dive into what's next for the New Orleans Saints, including what could happen with Charlie Smith. We'll get to that as well. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Next up for the New Orleans Saints with their initial 53-man roster is to absolutely scour the waiver wire, as well as, of course, the free agency market, all of that, to figure out who they might be able to call in, who they might be able to sign, and what moves they might look to make next. Let's break down some of the things that we might expect to see over the course of the next 48 or so hours. And then we'll look ahead to the next couple of weeks, too, because there's going to be a lot of movement within the first couple of weeks of the season. And I want to explain why. One major contributing factor as to why that is the case. We appreciate you very much for being here. We'll be with you again tomorrow. I will have an episode out Thursday morning and Friday morning. No live shows Not no more live shows. We're going to be doing a lot of live shows, but no live shows Thursday or Friday. I'll be traveling, so I'll just do my typical regular schedule of Thursday morning and Friday morning to make sure that you've got everything you need to know. We'll take a look at the practice squad tomorrow morning. We'll take a look at what the usage of those guys might be and all that too. So we're going to have a fun episode for you tomorrow morning. We appreciate you very much, as always, for being here. All right, so what's next for the New Orleans Saints? Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people were really kind of concerned about was what happened at kicker, right? It was one of the position battles. Charlie Smith, Blake Grupe, everyone fell in love with Charlie Smith kicking that 60 and 65-yard field goal. It's so easy with absolutely no hindrance at all. Just nailed it. And I think people got very excited about that, and that makes perfect sense. But the Saints chose to go with Blake Grupe. Dennis Allen saying that he really likes Blake Grupe, that they're excited about the decision, and that they made the decision. The decision was pretty easy to make for them. And that's not to say that Charlie Smith did anything bad. It's just that, look, Charlie Smith has been kicking for 2 years, and he needs to develop. And the Saints could continue to develop him. Here's what happens next with Charlie Smith. Charlie Smith goes to waivers. I'm sorry for repeating this a third time, but just as a reminder, if another team wants to claim him off of waivers, they have to be willing to add him to their 53-man roster. That feels like a steep expectation for a team that would be doing so based on one 37-yard field goal and some reports of a 60 and 65-yard field goal. You feel what I'm saying? It's not like the Seahawks, if they needed a kicker. I just picked the team, sorry. Would see everything that went on in training camp and all this other stuff and say, ooh, let's go get that guy, right? You got 2 years of NFL, 2 years of American football experience. You kicked your first ever American football field goal in that first preseason game. And then he didn't get an opportunity to kick in any preseason games after that in terms of field goals. And international player coming over, and you don't have access to what happened in training camp. You can read what happened in training camp and all those things. I'm sure you can call the Saints and say, hey, tell me about this Charlie Smith kid. But the Saints are going to, play those cards close to the vest, I would imagine. So I think Charlie Smith's going to make it through waivers. Here's the part that becomes really fun. The Saints could then bring him back as an international player, right? As an international player, they could bring him back as a roster exemption onto their practice squad. So here's what that means. It means he doesn't count against the roster. It also means he doesn't count against the 16-man practice squad. It's a good deal. Here's the caveat. They wouldn't be able to just activate him when and if they ever wanted to activate him. I think they'd have to actually cut him, have him pass through waivers again, and then sign him to your active roster, which, look, it can happen, okay? But it's not a situation where it's like, oh, Blake Grupe went down in a game, let's send Charlie Smith out there. No. Not going to be able to do that. Not going to be able to do that. So that's the way that I think the Saints should go about this, though, is bring him back on that international player roster exemption. If at a later point in the season you feel like you need to turn to him, because you're going to get the opportunity to look at him, you're going to see him in practice, all those other things. If you find that you're going to have to turn to him, fine. Go ahead, do it. Move him, bring him back, put him on your active roster, all that stuff. Cool. Otherwise, he just gets to develop. You just get to work with him. You just get to deepen your connection with him. You just get to develop him further. And Darren Rizzi gets to work with him in the process of developing him further and everything. Great. So that's what I think should happen with Charlie Smith. We'll see exactly what happens. The next things that I think that are in line for the New Orleans Saints is scouring that waiver wire as well as that free agency pool to see if there's any offensive linemen that are worth pursuing. I think you open your eyes to what wide receivers are out there to see if there's anyone of value that can help you from a big-bodied possession catch perspective. All right, they got a lot of speed. They got Cedric Wilson there. Chris Olave is kind of their possession guys. You might want somebody else. Don't know. Maybe they don't. Maybe they do. I'm not sure. But I would be looking at that. I would be keeping my eyes on the safety spot. I think Lewis, forgive me, signed, seen, not sure. But the Minnesota Vikings safety that was released, who was a first-round pick, put in a waiver claim on him and just see what happens. You know what I mean? Unless there's some reason that he ended up getting released that we don't know about yet that would be of detriment to your team culture or something like that, then sure, but we don't know that that's the case, so we don't want to speculate on that. But I would put an offer in there, or not an offer, but I would put a waiver claim in there. And just as a reminder, the way that waivers work is that it's in reverse order of your end of year order, basically. What was your initial draft order before draft picks were traded and stuff like that. So for instance, the Carolina Panthers, who technically owned the first round pick this year or this past year, but had traded it a year before so that they could go up and draft Bryce Young, to the Chicago Bears, who would then turn around that same year and draft Caleb Williams. Oh my goodness. If you're the Carolina Panthers, that's got to hoit. The Carolina Panthers, though, technically own that position. They were the worst team in football last year, worst record in football last year. And so they have the top priority order, right? And then it just runs back up to the Kansas City Chiefs, for instance, who have the 32nd priority order. So that's the way that it works when it comes to waivers. So people will put their claims in. And I believe it's 4 p.m. Eastern time tomorrow where those claims will end up being cashed in. And then boom, you'll see. But I think there's a good chance that like some things start to move before then. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, you're going to see a lot when it comes to roster changes. Let me tell you one reason why. First of which is that like you're always shuffling things around. Sometimes you carry people over to your roster that you want to put on injured reserve. Sometimes you carry people over on your roster and then all of a sudden another player becomes available that you really like and that you want to bring in. You bring that player in and then you need to make room for that player. So then you move on from kind of the last in, first out kind of mentality. That 53rd guy ends up getting moved on from in those situations. That all that happens. The other thing is that after week 1, contracts are non-guaranteed. It's not anybody you want. They all get paid on a per game basis based upon the contract that you negotiate with them, prorated over the rest of the season, i.e. if you sign somebody ahead of the week 3 game, they get paid weeks 3 through however many games they actually appear for you, not, or are on your roster, not, you don't have to go back and back pay up to week 1, right? So that's another reason why a lot of stuff happens after week 1 too. Over the course of those couple of weeks there, you'll see veterans end up getting signed, veterans signing, all these other things because those contracts now easier for teams to manage against their books because they're non-guaranteed. So that's why you'll see a few more of those things happening over the course of the next few weeks. But the next steps, I think, for the Saints, offensive line, getting Charlie Smith, building out your practice squad, and continuing to look at where you can improve at other positions should the players offer the opportunity, the players in the market offer that opportunity to you at positions, specific positions. Oh, that was a terrible sentence. I hope you tracked that. I'm sorry. That sucked. All right. We'll have a fresh episode for you tomorrow morning. Take a look at the practice squad after it's all assigned. Can't wait to break that down because those practice squad members will end up contributing for the New Orleans Saints at some point or another in 2024, or at least the majority of them will. All right, well, we appreciate y'all very much for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day for your second listen. Make sure you go and check out Locked On Pelicans as well as Locked On LSU. And if you want to know what's going on all around Locked On Louisiana, we've got you covered here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you very much for making us your first listen and making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you momming them. You trust Who Dat Nation? I'll holla at you.